episode number 8 of Community Talks. Today we are talking with Ryan Delehanty, who works with AMI. So without further ado, let's get to know Ryan a bit. Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here with you, Josh.
Well, we're glad to have you here. That's for sure. Now, Ryan, tell me about yourself.
Sure. So, Ryan Delehanty, I work with Accessible Media here in our Halifax office and have been working with them for 13 years as of about a week or so ago. And yeah, I'm kind of, always interested in arts and music and film and television. And, through quite a few different things, had really developed a lot of passion for accessibility as well, which is why it's been such a pleasure to work for an organization like this. And when I started, we were known as Voice Print and really just got involved as it seemed like a really interesting volunteer opportunity for me, both in terms of giving back. In particular, at that time, it was a reading service known as Voice Print, geared towards making print accessible for the blind and partially sighted community. And I'd done a lot of community radio with CKDU, the Dalhousie station here, but hadn't really done much in terms of voicing articles and reading professionally or, even in a volunteer capacity. And so I was really excited when I saw the opportunity, and I was fairly miserable in my work for a corporate banking call center at the time. And so started volunteering. Really enjoyed that. Was working with a really wonderful roster of other volunteers and the staff there in the Halifax office. And after about 8 months of volunteering, a job opportunity came up. And so once I got the interview locked down, not knowing whether I would get the job or not, I quit my crummy call center job, just knowing that I really needed a change and to do something that, I believed in or thought actually served, a positive purpose in society. And so 13 years later, it's been a pretty incredible journey, and it's been a privilege to be involved in so many of the things that we do. And and to do things like this and to get to join you and learn more about your organization as well and everything you guys are doing at St. John's.
Fantastic. I know that you have a couple of books and maybe some records behind you. You much of a music guy?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of my community radio. It was really just making a music playlist, and that's fun and nice. And it's great to share music that maybe people aren't familiar with, stuff that you're passionate about and, see a lot of value in. But, I didn't really feel like I was adding much value to that music, right? Just kind of stringing songs together. I would avoid talking as much as I could. I would use computerized voices just because I thought it was fun to have a robot host and I could make them say ridiculous things that I would feel a little bit awkward saying or embarrassed to hear back. So it was really just making something for my own enjoyment, and hopefully other people shared in that. And I have quite a record collection, and I'm always picking up different things. Probably doesn't help that one of my best friends since we were 15 owns a record store here in town. So he keeps me supplied with lots of good music, more than I can afford. And always had been into movies and TV. And so it was always sort of a dream to kind of work in that industry. It never seemed very realistic, just as a person growing up in Halifax. It seemed like a bit of a pipe dream. And so would always try and keep busy with little things like the radio shows. And I got into found footage video editing. So collecting weird VHS tapes from Value Village or thrift stores, and then trying to kind of digitize the tapes and then cut it down to just the craziest sort of moments, things that were so bad that it has some entertainment value or cultural significance. You find a tape at a thrift store called Cool Asthma Kids, teaching 90s Canadians that they can be a totally righteous dude even though they have asthma. And it's well-meaning, but sometimes there's some really funny kind of moments in a lot of those tapes. And so I kind of got into that editing, and and just been able to, apply some of those tools to different projects I've worked on with AMI. There's some things that I've been very hands-on with, and then some things that's just a pleasure to, be able to give opportunities for other people to work and cover interesting subject matter and make some really interesting documentaries and other programs for us too.
Well, for for the people who are listening right now, you mentioned AMI. Can you tell us what is AMI?
So AMI would be Accessible Media Inc. And as I mentioned, when I started, we were an organization known as NBRS, the National Broadcast Reading Service, which formed in the late 80s. And it was found that people who are blind or partially sighted lacked access to critical news and information that you really need to be able to access to be involved in your community. So you might be able to follow the TV or radio news to a certain extent, but they might not getting into the amount of detail or covering certain subjects that you would find more in the newspapers, especially if there's a city council meeting last night or your neighborhood's being rezoned or things that really impact you. And if you want to be engaged in your community, having those print barriers can actually prevent you from knowing that there is this meeting that you might want to attend, or what your counselor has or hasn't done. And so we had that roster of volunteer readers. We had arrangements with papers from all over Canada and internationally. And we sort of evolved over the years to where that was the majority of our service. We had a department called Audio Vision, which was our first foray into described movies and TV. And then in the late 2000s, we sort of rebranded and have become Accessible Media Inc. And we still have a lot of that print reading service, less done by volunteers now, more with professional readers as AMI Audio. And then within AMI Audio, we have podcasts now that are, custom built podcasts. We have live shows every day. So in the mornings, it's Now with Dave Brown, which is both on AMI TV and AMI Audio. And the afternoons on AMI Audio exclusively, we have Kelly and Company every weekday for 2 hours each day. And so there we have, community reporters from Newfoundland and from the rest of the country, often covering accessibility matters. So Kim Thistle Murphy is our reporter in St. John's, and so she'll do movie reviews for us. But in addition to reviewing, the quality of the movie, the entertainment value, she's also viewing it with description and reviewing the quality of the description job, because that does vary quite wildly, as it still is really emerging. And for a lot of people creating description, they may not be sort of audited or hitting certain standards or have that sort of baseline. That's a quality standard to aspire to. And then we also have AMI TV. And so we're considered an essential service of Canada. So we have the same sort of status as APTN, Aboriginal People's Television, where it's something that the CRTC and the whole broadcast industry decided was a really important service, and these groups aren't being represented, and they need to have that sort of representation or a home on the television dial. And so if you pay Cogeco or Eastlink or Rogers, $80 a month for your cable package, we get 20 cents per cable subscriber per month that funds AMI. So we are not for profit, though we don't take charitable donations. It's really pretty much the entirety of our funding comes through the broadcasting system. But with that, we operate a free AMI TV app. So all of our original content that we've been making, you can access on our app on iOS, Apple TV, now on Android as well. We also have our website, ami.ca, and really strive to have positive portrayal of people with disabilities, regional representation. Our mission is to be a media company that entertains, informs, and empowers Canadians who are blind and partially sighted. But in doing so, the subject matter, the content that's created really represents all manner of disability, accessibility issues. And we really are trying to engage the community members and find the people that are doing interesting work, that have a passion for media, for content creation, let them know about AMI and how they can get involved with us. And, the more people that, are using the accessibility tools, the more we learn, the more they advance our description techniques and practices. And, the more interesting content we get, hopefully from, every corner of the country.
Perfect. Well, that's quite the mission statement to have. It's very honorable. Now, in terms of accessible media, can you tell our viewers what exactly is your job at AMI?
That's a tricky one. I could probably go on for an hour or so. So in 13 years, it's evolved and changed quite a bit. I'm by title the Content Development Specialist for Atlantic Canada. And at AMI, we have Ami Télé, which I neglected to mention, which would be our French TV service. So if you're in a French community, you would have access to that channel with your basic cable package. And so we have the French channels operated out of our Montreal bureau. We have 5 other offices across Canada, so Vancouver, Edmonton, Ottawa, Toronto, and Halifax. And so I would be sort of our primary representative, I guess, in Atlantic Canada. We have in every bureau, Toronto being our head office, we have, our IT and HR departments and, a lot of management and all the other sort of layers in a company like this. But in the regions, it's a little bit smaller. So we have a small production team in every bureau. So generally it's a producer, a videographer slash editor, and a reporter or presenter. And by and large, the reporters all are blind or partially sighted or have other disabilities. And that's really to make sure that when telling a story, it's from that authentic experience. If we're reviewing an activity or a new facility, we don't want to make assumptions about how accessible it may or may not be. We want people that can really, vet that in an authentic way and bring that perspective to the stories. So my role is to make sure that I support them as much as possible. If I see stories, they're mostly going out and doing what become 5-minute stories on a program we run for about 10 years now called AMI This Week. And it's really getting our production teams out into the communities. They might be checking out the new accessible tree lining, with Trigo, I think it's called zip lining. They just made an accessible, wheelchair accessible course here in Nova Scotia. So that's one thing they're looking at is, this is apparently one of the first, wheelchair accessible zip lining courses, tailored to wheelchair users, maybe in Canada. I think it's more popular in Europe. So getting out and kind of covering those sorts of stories, different events, issue-based stories. Then we also hire producers. So we have production partners all over the country. And that's a big part of my role, is to find producers that are like-minded, that have a passion for this sort of subject matter, that it is, familiar to them, and to find different subjects. So really to find, the people to tell the stories as well as the stories that would be relevant. And, so I'm always looking for material that would be relevant to our audience. And then it's a matter of kind of figuring out where it makes the most sense, how we can best cover that story. So it may be that our bureau team goes out and interviews somebody like yourself. Either, now we're able to do a lot more over Zoom. Before it was really, going out in the, the company vehicle and being on the ground. And that's great when we can do that as well. But then also, it might be something that is a little more time sensitive and we can get them on one of our live audio shows. Or, I meet somebody that is just so engaged in the community and, a really good, representative spokesperson, then, maybe there's a spot as a community reporter on one of these live shows, and I'll kind of make those connections. And then also we do a program called Our Community. So each episode is a half hour, really just looking at one organization, individual program, whatever it might be, that exists to benefit the lives of other people with disabilities. And so there's that's somewhat open-ended. There's a lot of stuff that fits there. And so finding producers that can make those docs for us, and often finding those subject matters. So, some that I'm really fond of, we've had in recent years, we followed Jen Powley as she was running for city council here in Halifax in a doc called Powley for District 7. And so for somebody who, speaks through assistive technology, who's, running for council as a person with a disability using a power chair, having to knock on doors isn't as easy in a historic city. So some of the different challenges that she ran into and just the significance of that sort of campaign run. Other docs on, Dream Wings, which is a really cool charity flying kids around. Deep Sky Eye, which is a astronomer who's legally blind, who's built this amazing observatory, and he's fighting light pollution. So really trying to find all these different things and seeing, how we can maybe bring them to a larger audience.
Well, now you mentioned wheelchair accessible zip lining. I'm really intrigued on how they would make sure that they accessible. Um, I don't know if you know much about it, but
I'll send you some links. Yeah, it's
yeah, if you could send me some info, that would be really good, and I would be happy to share it on my accessible now page. But I'm a little bit of how do I say?
thrill
For
seeker.
those who know me most, I'm a little bit of a daredevil, or a little bit of a speed demon when it comes to my wheelchair. I'm always pushing the envelope on what I can do and the activities I participate in. So a wheelchair accessible zip line would be something right up my alley.
Yeah, it
I
looks
just
really
might
cool.
have to come. I might have to come check that out sometime.
All right. Yeah, maybe we can do that story too. Yeah, I'll send you that. You might also like, I'll send you some links. We have a new show called By Hook or By Cook, and he is engineering some really amazing stuff and doing kind of thrill seeking adventures and helping people. The episode I watched was a guy who I think had, been a dirt bike rider and had been in an accident and could no longer ride his dirt bike, and they had this custom 3-wheel off-road bike that he can still run all those same trails and still get all that speed and go over jumps. And yeah, so that's a really cool program that's pretty new for us as well. So, and that's often it, is kind of having that two-way communication where I want to know what, people in the communities are doing and see how we can, bring their stories to our channel. But also once I find out what they're into, I might say, oh, for one person, it's, oh, our cooking show, The Four Senses, that's what you should check out. For somebody else, it's By Hook or By Cook, or Tales from the Halifax School for the Blind is a project that's been, really dear to me that I've been quite involved in. What Happened to Holly Bartlett is another one that I'm really proud we were able to make. And I thought the podcast in particular, I did an amazing job telling a very difficult, very sensitive story, but one that's very important, and something where, because this young lady who was incredibly accomplished, who was getting her master's, working for the province, going swing dancing and horseback riding every weekend, because she was blind, the police had made a lot of assumptions about what logically could have happened to her after a night out drinking with friends, and really didn't do a proper investigation at all because of their inherent, ableism, and had no interest in learning how a blind person would navigate her neighborhood, and had all these kind of knee-jerk reactions, and oh, blind girl gets drunk, anything can happen, no need to look any deeper. And so, years later, her family were still looking for answers, we're still just wanting it to be taken seriously. And so to be able to, get their blessing and find the right production company to tell that story, who had some expertise doing stuff in that area, it took a while to come together. But I'd known just from the people that I'd worked with, Jeff Overmars and some other people that we'd worked with in Halifax that were so close to Holly Bartlett, that it was something that really mattered to the community and still, felt open-ended. And there's no resolution for something like that, but to be able to really illustrate who she was. And just through a coincidence, Kim Hart McNeil, a person that I had worked with, that a lot of friends in common, she had made a documentary as a student film about Holly while Holly was still living. And so to have that footage, and to have Holly have a real presence in the series, and when they're speculating about how she got lost and making up very illogical theories about her being dropped off at her front door and going the wrong direction and doubling down on the wrong direction and finding a fence and crawling under a fence, nothing made sense. And so to have that footage of her with her white cane, with full confidence, navigating that same area where they think she got lost, it's, I think, for anybody, once you kind of start seeing that and hearing it explained, and the logic of how somebody would orient themselves without vision, that she's going to be judging by the grade, the slope of her driveway. She's going downhill, she's going away from her door. If she's going towards the bridge traffic, that should be at her back, that should be behind her. And these are all things that in that investigation just weren't being considered. And when people reach out to them and say, hey, let's tell you a little bit about orientation mobility training, like, let's help you do a better investigation, I think the reaction from the police was, thanks, no thanks, we did a good job. And clearly that wasn't the case. So that was something I was really proud we were able to share that story, and hopefully in a very authentic and sensitive way, where other media outlets may just struggle more with the language, or may emphasize a lot of the wrong things, or the things that aren't remarkable about the story, that just is every day for somebody who's blind or partially sighted. Yeah, that was one that was really dear to me. And yeah, it's been a privilege, as I said, it's hard to think back. There's been so many in the 13 years, but there's still as many projects on the horizon now that I'm excited about as there was, a few years ago. So that's a really nice feeling to have as well.
It's such a sad story. I've heard about that myself. I looked into that. It's crazy how the police just, like you said, they don't accept any help. They think they did a good job, or obviously they never. And it's just not. that's not right. It really rubs you the wrong way. Like I just recorded another one of these episodes last week with an individual who is seeing impaired, and she would have trouble with a crosswalk
Hmm.
sign. It wasn't loud enough for her to hear it. So if she presses the button, the only way she knows that it's safe to cross is when she hears the alarm, right? And so she phoned up the city and kind of complained about it and asked for it to get fixed. And she asked, all right, well, I can be there to help out and see if I can hear it. And they said, no, it's fine. You don't need to be there. We got it covered. And they went out a week later and they fixed it. And she said, no, it's still not loud enough. So even within other organizations, like city or even in government, you just you get the ableism, as you said. And if they just would let her in from the beginning to help out, then the problem could easily been fixed.
Yeah, just to acknowledge that there are things you don't know, or there's the potential that there are things you don't know, and to bring in the stakeholders, the experts. And so that's been something that's been really interesting to follow over the last 13 years in Halifax. Is I'd really made an effort to find the different accessibility organizations that are doing good work, whether that's in employment or the built environment or education, or just in terms of culturally, what have you. And going to we have for the city, we have an accessibility advisory committee that would meet every month, and that committee was made up of people of various disabilities. And it just being in the audience and seeing what the city would bring to them. And sometimes big projects would be undertaken and the people responsible wouldn't think to run that by the committee, and that's what the committee was there for, to before they spend all this money, before they set themselves, lock themselves into a certain course of action, that people can poke holes in it and find the issues. And so, but over time, I think from the people controlling it, if that's the chief administrative officer, the mayor for the city, whomever, I think the different business units of the city learned that they did need to go by this committee and really present things and get a lot of really important feedback. But watching that, I'd seen the early proposals for automated stop announcements, which are a huge difference on public transportation for people who are blind or partially sighted. Or the bus is full, the windows are foggy in the winter, you can't see what's out the window, there's a glare. There's all kinds of times for anybody that universal design, it's not just benefiting one narrow group of people. If you have a door opener or whatever else, it can benefit a huge spectrum of the population. And so seeing it from kind of the planning stages. And I think with the automated the signal crossing sounds, sometimes people they overestimate the nuisance that will pose. Oh, it's going to be too loud, turn it down, we don't want to bother the homeowners in that area. It's like, no, it just becomes part of the background, they won't notice it. After maybe the first day it'll annoy them, 2 days later they're oblivious to it. And so I remember going to like a public consultation about the automated stop announcements, something that in particular, the blind and partially sighted community had been, clamoring for and advocating for a long time. And then, one person at the meeting is like, oh, that'll sound annoying, I don't want to hear that when I'm on the bus. It's like, well, no, you'll be fine, it won't be a big deal. And but thankfully, they'd already transitioned our transit to 100% low floor wheelchair accessible buses. We do have a separate accessibus service, but the cost to operate that is so much higher. They want to transition anybody that's able to take the more traditional bus fleet to take that. And you have more freedom, you don't have to book an appointment, you don't have to be available at a narrow window of time for pickup. And so they already made the buses a lot more wheelchair accessible. They still had some issues with the tie down, so especially people with power wheelchairs, they'd switched sort of the strap tie down system. And people felt very unsafe, and they had to really, so it was probably kind of an arbitrary decision. Oh, this one's a little cheaper, or we like the supplier better. And then the people using it are like, no, this is a huge safety issue. the solution's actually really simple. They were looking at this quantum arm, so this like automated arm that would come down and then go maybe like 3/4 of the height of a wheel, and then kind of like lock in and hug the wheel. But it's so high tech. If that breaks down, it might be months before it gets repaired. It's super expensive to put on every bus. And so people are like, well, you're looking at this super high tech solution, and if you just had like crossing straps that were more secure and trained the bus driver better to take a minute when somebody boards to help them out, that's going to save you a fortune, and it's going to be a lot more effective, and it's not going to have the risk of breaking down and being out of order for extended periods. So it's been interesting to see that back and forth, and to see them be better about engaging people in the city, and hopefully making smarter decisions as a result, and really improving things. So we got our more accessible bus fleet. We got our automated stop announcements to make transit much more accessible for the blind partially sighted community. Even people moving from other regions to hear how streets are pronounced, and to like get to know the area. Like it's really universally helpful. But we're really struggling in Halifax now with accessible taxis. And so for the last oh goodness, like 8-9 years, I've seen all these proposals and different solutions put forward. I think actually you guys have the edge on us in St. John's. I think you've got a much better accessible taxi service than we do in Halifax. But it's interesting to see how things are developing in the different areas, what the best practices are, and if I can, see what your group's, advocating for, and maybe share a couple stories that we did on the automated stop announcements. I know a group in New Brunswick that's, I think, somewhat recently formed on social media, the New Brunswick Coalition of Persons with Disabilities. That's something that they were really pushing for with their transit. So if I can, share that story we did celebrating the launch of it in Halifax, which I think was maybe in 2016, 2018, hopefully they can use that if somebody's, being reluctant or overestimating, the cost or the difficulty of implementing a system. They can say, hey, it was done in Halifax. Everybody celebrated. It made the transit system look good. You need to do it here too. And hopefully those sorts of things help, make progress, across the board.
Well, I hope some of that trickle down to our new plan, because we definitely need a better transit system, that's for sure. There's right now, I'm not sure if you're aware, probably I get an electric wheelchair. So if I want to get around the city, there's 4 ways for me to do so. I can just get around in my own chair, but I am very fortunate to have what my friends call a monster truck of a wheelchair. It's not your most typical one, but it definitely gets me around a lot easier than typical person in a motorized wheelchair. So I myself have that option, but a lot of people don't. So they're either going to go with the transit system, which only half the fleet of buses are accessible, and even most of the bus stops are not accessible. So there's a company here called GoBus that you can book for a ride, but it comes with limited stations. You can't call them up and get one right away. You gotta book it at least 24 hours in advance, and they can pick you up 15 minutes early or 15 minutes late, and the whole shindig of messing around with it is really complicated. And then, like you said, we got the accessible taxis, which are great, but are not really on the road as much as you would want them to be. So if you're going out, say last night I went downtown to a bar named O'Reilly's, which is the only accessible bar on Albert George Street, and I went there to see my friend perform. And like I said, I'm fortunate enough to go down in my wheelchair, with some friends who had to book the go bus. And depending on when the go bus gets there, you might need to leave early, and you won't be able to see or be able to enjoy yourself as much as you will want to, because you're stressed out on if you're going to make the bus on time,
Yeah.
or if they're going to leave you, or anything like that. And the taxis, they're not out there late on weekdays. They're only out late on the weekends.
Hmm.
If you want to have a taxi late on a weekday, you're gonna have to book them.
Takes it out all spontaneity, and you can't count on it, right? And you don't want to have to worry about the alternative if you're left in the lurch. And I've seen that. It's similar to our Accessibus service, and until recently, you needed to book that a week in advance. And I remember waiting with somebody. They're trying to improve the wait times and have a better system. They say that they're getting down to like same day booking, but for the majority of the time, you needed to book it 7 days in advance. And I remember waiting with the vice chair of the or I think she was the chair at the time of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. We were just chatting after the meeting, and she's waiting for her Accessibus that she's booked and scheduled way in advance because she knows she has this meeting. And we're just waiting by the door, and it's maybe 20 minutes after it should have shown up. And she calls, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we were there. Nobody was there, so the driver moved on." And thankfully, the dispatch person realized what an issue that was, and Vicky was there saying like, "I've been here the whole time. Like I would have seen it if it came by. We didn't miss it." And they worked something out. But I've heard some horror stories of people in the winter having to drive an hour in their electric wheelchair back from the hospital because they hadn't booked. It was a spontaneous hospital trip. They hadn't booked the Accessibus. There was not a single accessible taxi available, and they had no alternative. They were discharged from the hospital for the night, and in terrible conditions, risking illness and injury. And yeah, it's unacceptable. But you just see such apathy sometimes from the powers that be, and you have to kind of unfortunately, sometimes those horror stories help to actually prompt change when people realize the impact that this lack of infrastructure and resources has. And so things are improving. There definitely seems to be more awareness, but there's still a long way to go. And so it's part of what I find interesting is just seeing what the challenges are in the different areas, where what the best practices are, because there's things that are maybe better in Newfoundland, but we aren't doing here. And there may be things where we're a little bit further ahead with our provincial accessibility legislation, and aiming to make Nova Scotia fully accessible by 2030. So like one thing I find really helpful for my role is following your group and seeing what everybody's posting on the Accessible NL page. And that's really what I really stress with my colleagues is like, okay, what are people passionate about? Where are they spending their time and energy, and how can we help support that or cover that or represent that? And so in Nova Scotia, Bill 59 was a group that sprung up. That was the name of the bill that led to becoming our accessible legislation. And so there's still a lot of activity on the Bill 59 Facebook group, where people identifying different things like the Trigo, accessible ziplining. Somebody will share that. We at Peggy's Cove, one of our best little tourist attractions, they're building an accessible viewing platform. So something that people might have thought, oh, these glacial rocks, people are hopping from rock to rock. It's this jagged, outcropping by the ocean. Can't make that accessible. Well, yeah, they can. They made a beautiful viewing platform that I'm sure lots of people will, benefit from, not just, people who that's their only option to really get that experience there. But it's nice to see, and kind of with the library of stories we have and the different voices, I think it's just becoming more common. And that was something I think that was a struggle for us, was that for the longest time we were the only place on television in Canada where you could get described content, where sort of the older style is DV, described video. So if we're running Matlock or I Love Lucy, somebody's reviewed that show, hopefully just listening to the audio. And if something doesn't make sense, you say, okay, well, what was I not seeing there that I needed to see to understand the story? So everybody's laughing. Oh, it's because, the chocolate conveyor belt was out of control and Lucy was stuffing Malamars in her mouth and I couldn't see that. So we need to describe what that is. And seeing that evolve. And then we do what we call integrated described video. So if we are hiring a producer, if our team's making a story, we're sort of, the philosophy is kind of make it for radio and TV at the same time. So, the old TV mantra of show it, don't say it. Ours is show it and say it, and, have that reinforce the visual. And so if somebody's only taking the audio, they get the full story. If they're only taking in the visual, they get the full story. If they're taking in some mix, then, it's even more, hopefully, comprehensible. And so, yeah, it's been interesting just to see how that's evolved. But now, every channel now, like they had for decades before with closed captioning, now every channel in Canada for their prime time lineup since I think September of 2019 has had to offer description on their original content. So if you're watching, Schitt's Creek on CBC or whatever the popular show of the day is, hopefully now you should be able to get that with description. So there's less of us having that need to kind of be all things to all people and the only home for described content, and more of a focus on positive portrayal of people with disabilities, accessibility, disability related content that hopefully you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else, that really has meaningful involvement of the community and things that they would take pride in and want to further and and enjoy as entertainment, but also for information and resources and to help with your own self-advocacy or whatever it may be.
Uh, well, you kind of already brought it up a little bit, but I wonder if you could expand on a little bit. What exactly brings you to Accessible NL?
So for me, yeah, it was that. Just I'd seen a little bit of your comedy, and I was really interested in that. I'm a huge stand-up comedy fan, and so that was one thing. It's like, okay, maybe someday, I'll be able to check out a set, or there'll be something where we can work with Josh or interview him or whatever else. But then exactly that, just seeing it sort of be like a focal point for the community there, and you're going to find people that have solutions. They might have different tactics than you. Even like I was reading an article locally where saying that rehab centers, they need to train their staff to help wheelchair users better learn just like mobility tips and tricks. And Andrew Jansen, who's doing amazing work here in Halifax, he's involved with the Tetra Society and all these other organizations. He was sort of the primary voice being interviewed in the article, and it's something that I hadn't thought about. I kind of felt parallels with, the focus for people who are new to their vision loss, getting intensive orientation mobility training to learn how to navigate the world with different types of white canes, different environments. So you navigate with a guide dog, whatever it may be. That Andrew was saying, so many things that he learned were just through peers, and it was never really taught to him in the rehab center. I think one example was using a Ziploc bag over the controls of your chair to keep them more like weather safe and this and that. And so, some people unfortunately learn the hard way after, something gets damaged. But if you have that foresight to have somebody say, hey, you might want to, here's a tip, this might help you, or here's how to navigate, icy terrains more safely or whatever else, right? It's better, to have that expertise and learn from somebody else rather than, learn in a dire situation or in a, something a little bit dicey out in the world. So, that was really interesting. And, seeing the Accessible NL group and just, people sharing and, having visited Newfoundland, quite a few times, definitely, I found a lot of the intersections very convoluted and unintuitive. And, driving around as, a sighted person, I was like, I don't know what to do here. Like, I feel a little bit fearful that I'm going to get into an accident. And then just imagining, navigating that, without vision, or just the hills and the sidewalk turns into steps and then it breaks up. I was like, okay, there's a lot of accessibility issues here. And just seeing, like what you guys are sharing and, then just kind of who's involved. And again, if there's an opportunity with AMI, oh, this is great to know. We're looking for people in Newfoundland, or when we, after, COVID's a little bit safer to travel, when we're going back, like, okay, who do I want to reach out to and try and have meetings with and talk to and kind of, give them the big picture of AMI, and then they can kind of find what they're interested in and say, oh, I love audio, like I'm interested in, following the audio programs, and I could offer this that's not being represented, or like, oh, we're looking to do a comedy special or interview a comedian, then, maybe somebody like Josh could, speak to that and, be part of this panel or discussion. And so really, it's a big part for me is just to really know what's going on and, who the people are. And then usually that inspires much better ideas than I would come up with myself, is seeing like, okay, this is what they're passionate about. Like, been a big fan of Paul Power for years now, and he'd come and done a performance here, and I'd seen an earlier play of his, Roomies, and got to know him a little bit then. And when he was coming back to Halifax, when he was in the process of developing the play Crippled, It was really wonderful to get to, reconnect. And he was doing a table read and wanted to engage, artists in the Halifax community. He's, I think, through Canada Council of the Arts funding, he was doing a report on the state of accessibility in, theater and the arts in Atlantic Canada. And so it was great if I could say, oh, Paul, here's, 3 or 4 people that you should talk to that would probably love to take part in that panel. And, he'd asked me to moderate it, which I was, very flattered. But, and just seeing the evolution of that play and just what a beautiful, piece of theater and how personal it was, that's been one of my dream projects, was to work with Paul to see if we can make that available to a wider audience, maybe through AMI, maybe through another capacity, but, just, identifying those sorts of people and, the people that are doing really cool, really interesting things that I think more people need to know about. So if I can help give it more of a spotlight, or, with your group, I recall, one of our earlier conversations was like, okay, well, maybe of some benefit to you. We've got our best practices on doing description, on, being descriptive. Like if I can send some stuff to people that are interested, or, if people are interested in employment, well, our Employable Me show, as really quality program, and you can see all kinds of different journeys and the supports they may receive, what the challenges are, and then some stuff that might just be lighter. Like I really love a podcast one of our presenters in Halifax here, we've worked with different capacities over the years, Jenny Bovard, does Low Vision Moments, and so it's something that she was talking about with me years and years ago. And when we did like a batch of podcasts, she made a podcast where she brings on another person every episode who's also blind or partially sighted, and they just have a laugh about things that, the day it happened they probably found pretty traumatic, but now a couple years later they might find it quite hilarious, when they hip check a kid and knock it over because they couldn't see all the rugrats running around, or what might have happened. So it's nice to share that stuff too.
I never knew you knew Paul Power. He's a wonderful man to work with. I must say, I'm actually on the Power Production Board,
Mm-hmm.
and I met Paul through acting classes. He used to host them at Easter Seal, so I really got to know Paul over the years, and I'm glad you know him. Cause when I was thinking about you and what you do, I figured somewhere along the way you must have ran into Paul.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
lucky to have, yeah. And very, again, it's hard to I mean, obviously I can chat at length. Sometimes I get onto my tangents, but so much of my job, I just feel so lucky to, get to travel to St. John's and take some of my colleagues to see the hometown premiere of Crippled at LSPU Hall, and just what a warm reception he had there, and just what an amazing job they did. And having seen it in a couple earlier iterations as well, I was just really impressed with how much it had changed. And I don't want to give anything away, but he'd kind of breaks the fourth wall and did some really kind of smart stuff that I wasn't expecting. And it was just so beautifully done, and clearly such a labor of love for him, that it was something that I was like, okay, if there's anything we can ever do to help support this, or to bring it to more people, then let me do what I can with our resources and platforms. And so it's a real privilege to get to do that sort of stuff. And hopefully next trip I'll get to see a stand-up set of yours or something like that. And yeah, absolutely.
Well, I recently did a stand-up set in my office, 120 Merchant Road. We have a room right next to our office that we are able to rent out, and we also use it for our own events. So if you're interested, that's actually on my Facebook comedy page. If you want to look at that, I had some comedians, I had some musicians. It was a real good time.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm hoping to do that now every another one in September.
Yeah, that'd be
But
great.
I myself, I go down to Peter Easton Pub every Sunday to do comedy. And I gotta say, looking back at it now, if you asked me about 5 or 10 years ago, I never would have thought that was the route that I would have gone. But I really enjoy also using my comedy to spread the word about disabilities and kind of get people to laugh so they're a bit more comfortable with just learning and knowing about disabilities. So it's a really fun thing I do, and I really enjoy it. And I really like how it just fits in with accessible and what I'm doing there too. So the last question I have for you, Ryan, before we clear up, and I want to give you the spot. Is there anything you have on the go, like any projects or any events or anything you want to let the audience know about?
Um, yeah, there's always stuff. It's hard to narrow in sometimes. I don't want to give you a huge laundry list. So one thing I'd mentioned briefly that was pretty close to me is a podcast that I started just over a year ago called Tales from the Halifax School for the Blind. And so just through the work, I'd met so many people, older generations that had graduated from this school that was in operation from the late 1800s until about 1980. And, kids from all over Atlantic Canada, sometimes, 5, 6 years old would be, separated from their families and go to Halifax. Thankfully that school was very much shaped by Sir Charles Frederick Fraser, who had been educated at the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston. And, most of the staff were blind or partially sighted themselves. And so it really was giving kids the tools to lead an independent life, through, the 20th century. And, but very interesting, a lot of the differences with education where, they maybe steered them towards careers, but it was a fairly limited number of careers. So a huge emphasis on math and music, piano tuning, chair caning, things that you wouldn't maybe expect to be part of the curriculum. But it was an environment where all these kids came together, and as much from the curriculum and the good teachers and staff that they had, the house parents, everybody else, they really had the opportunity to learn from each other. Where if they were educated in their hometown classrooms, especially in that era, they would not have been well accommodated or included at all. They might not have ever met another kid who had a similar eye condition. And so Terry Kelly, who's quite a renowned musician, he's from Newfoundland. He had gone to the school, and we'd known him for quite a long time. And Robert Mercer, who's in Prince Edward Island, had written a book called Mrs. Beaton's Question, all about his time at the school. And so a bunch of different things kind of came together where we had the idea to make this podcast and get the people that lived there in the different generations to share their first person stories. And it's really, coming of age stories in this interesting environment. But it could be about anything. It could be about, teenage mischief or falling in love. So one episode I really liked was set in the 1960s with a couple that met, Fred and Gloria Haynes. They met at the school in the 1960s, and they're still together today. And Jean was also there. And they used to have a fence that divided the yard so the boys and the girls couldn't mingle. And so they were there when that fence came down, and kind of how, the gender dynamic changed in the 1960s. So some really fun stories. You get the humor, you get the heartbreak, and everything else just, from that, time in anybody's life, right? When you're finding out who you are and, becoming an adult and everything else. So that's been a real pleasure to work on. The full first season, 6 episodes, is available now. And we just hired an intern, and her parents went to the school. But she, as somebody who's partially sighted, went through our current educational system where it's integrated, and there are pros and cons of that. We're not really trying to say one thing's better than the other, but just to share those personal stories about what it was like. And that's a history that's not really preserved anywhere. And I was able to interview this lady Shirley Treitz, who's was 91. Unfortunately, she recently passed. But in her 70s, she wrote a book on the history, Reading Hands, the history of the Halifax School for the Blind, because she didn't see anybody else doing it, and she thought it was important. She knew it was important, and so didn't consider herself an author. But in her 70s, she took it upon herself to write this book and really detail the history. And so trying to respect that and to, preserve it and make it more available. So I'm hoping that we can, work elements of her audiobook into the show. We've got the intern hopefully working on it now. We're wanting to, we've got a lot of great music from the students from the early 70s. So I'm trying to like integrate some of that music into the show and, see what we can do there just to share different sorts of stories. So that's one thing that I've been really really pleased to be able to work on, pretty closely. And then we have a lot of different sort of documentaries on the horizon that I'm excited about. I mentioned the Jen Pally one turned out really well on her election campaign. There's a local artist here in Halifax that I've seen at different markets and things over the years, and just more and more been impressed once I, read her book and saw some of her animations. So we have a documentary coming up on Anna Kwan, a really great Halifax artist. And I think that's a little bit more poetic than some of the other stuff we do. So I'm really intrigued by that one. And something that's kind of cool, I'll be talking about more in the coming weeks, is we're looking at doing a Dungeons and Dragons sort of one-off special and getting members of the blind partially sighted community where it is an oral sort of adventure, theater of the mind, to get people just like playing D&D and having the chance just to have fun and kind of adopt and embrace this character, and through like the randomness of the dice rolls and collaborating with your fellow adventurers, to be able to kind of improvise and problem solve and have a lot of fun going on this sort of epic journey, and kind of having that maybe parallel some of their personal journeys. And so I'll be really curious to see how that turns out, but we're hoping to do some casting soon and find people that are interested in partaking, and then if it works, then see where things go from there.
That sounds very exciting. I've been known to play a game of D&D myself, so I'll have to tune in and see how that works out.
Absolutely. And there's a lot that's inherently accessible about it that people wouldn't necessarily realize. And then depending, there are, apps for, building your character sheets and different things. So we might have a couple accessibility tips and tricks, and then just sort of a fun adventure as well, and to do different sorts of things. So I'm always interested in stuff that might be a little bit unusual, but hopefully, is authentic and makes sense and is a fun experience for, the viewer and everybody involved in, making it, participating.
Right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on today. And those of you listening at home, if you want to learn more about AMI, I will be sure to link their website in the description below. So make sure you check that out. And thank you again, Ryan. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, my pleasure. And easiest way to reach me if anybody's curious about us or has any ideas or comments, anything, would just be to email halifax@ami.ca, and that'll get to me and I can follow up from there.
Sounds good. I will be sure to put that in the description as well. Thank you again, Ryan.
Thank you.
I see you made it to the end of the video. Why not help us out by hitting that subscribe button and commenting down below to let us know how we did. And I'll see you in the next video.